today we're going to talk about the chapter 2, Skillful means of the threefold Lotus Sutra. And this video answers the following questions for the day. Why are chapters 2 and 16 of the Lotus Sutra considered to be the central chapters among the sutra's all 28 chapters? What are the central points of the chapter 2 titled Skillful means and its significance in a broader context of the Lotus Sutra itself? And here's the order of my talk. First, we will see how the chapter is set up. Second, I will answer the questions for the day in a nutshell. Third, I will give you some interesting passages from the chapter because knowing these passages will make us understand the narrative sequence of the chapter, which is very relatively long compared to other chapters. So here's the setup of the chapter. So the chapter starts with the Buddha Shakyamuni speaking, arising from his meditation that he's done in chapter 1 of the Lotus Sutra, and addresses to one of his disciples, Shariputra, by saying this: "The wisdom of Buddhas is infinite and extremely profound. The approach to their wisdom is difficult to enter and difficult to understand. It is beyond the comprehension of even Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas." So Shravaka means the Shariputra, one of the three types of the practitioners: Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. So three vehicles. Shravakas are literally means voice hearers, whose practice to hear the teaching and the voice of the Buddha. Pratyeka Buddhas is like a solitary practitioners. They contemplate on the teaching of the dependent origination and awaken on his or her own. And the Bodhisattvas are the enders of suffering of all beings. So how are these three relate to the universal Buddha vehicle? That's the question in chapter 2. With this setup in mind, let me answer the questions for the day in a nutshell. Okay, so why does Shakyamuni talk about the difficulty of understanding the wisdom of the Buddhas in the very outset of this chapter? That's the question, right? But as the chapter implies in the middle, the reason for talking about this difficulty is to remind of or to set up the value of ultimately understanding the Buddha's wisdom. Is it paradoxical? Yes, but this is very important because by talking about the difficulty of understanding the Buddha's wisdom, it's kind of setting up the value of understanding. If you understand an easy thing, it's good, but if you can understand, oh, this is very difficult, and then if you can eventually understand it, that value is greater and gives you joy, right? That's exactly what's going on. That's why the difficulty of understanding the Buddha's wisdom is presented in the very outset of this chapter 2, which will be very important for the rest of this chapter in the sutra. So with that in mind, with this creating of the value of Buddhahood, value of becoming a Buddha, the value of understanding the wisdom of the Buddha, the chapter reveals the punchline eventually. So that is to say, now you know, everyone in the audience, Buddha says, how hard it is to understand the Buddha's wisdom. With that in mind, it will be totally unexpected for you to hear this, but you know what? You all will become a Buddha, including viewers like you. It's hard to become a Buddha, but the Buddha says, you will become a Buddha. Wow, that's something, right? So that's what's going on. So it is because of this vision of the universal Buddhahood that the Lotus Sutra is considered to promote the principle of Buddha nature. Okay? So the Buddha nature is something inherent to all living beings. So this universal Buddhahood implies a universal Buddha nature. That's a connection, even though the word Buddha nature itself does not appear in the Chinese translation, or English, of course, translation of the Lotus Sutra. So then the chapter talks about in a way, the Buddha nature and also the universal Buddhahood in terms of several key ideas in the chapter, such as like 10 suchnesses, 1 Buddha vehicle, there are no Shravakas, but only Bodhisattvas are in my audience, Shakyamuni says, and the Buddha's great cause of appearance in the world, and so on. So you know, chapter 2, all these terminologies appear, but there are alternate different ways of talking about this universal Buddhahood, universally shared Buddha nature. So that's how we can straighten up all these kind of difficult terminology and so on that you see in this chapter. So saying you will be a Buddha, let's think about this. You will be a Buddha. Let's say you meet with the Buddha and that Buddha says to you, you will become a Buddha. What does that mean to you? So you will become a Buddha, saying that to someone, saying that for those who find no value in becoming a Buddha, no value in Buddhahood, is meaningless, right? So therefore, by way of reminding and setting up the value and also setting up the difficulty, showing the difficulty of understanding the Buddha's wisdom, showing the difficulty of becoming a Buddha, this chapter at the outset, it's creating the value of becoming a Buddha so that becoming a Buddha will be rather meaningful for those who hear it. That's why it is important to make a contrast between Buddhahood and non-Buddhahood, like deluded sentient beings like Shariputra's. I mean, he isn't one of the arhats, so he's a great disciple, but not yet Buddha. So making that contrast increases the value of Buddhahood. And then the chapter says, well, this value you practice, you see it's hard to become a Buddha. As you practice, you feel more the distance, and then this distance gets collapsed. That's the oneness between the Buddha and all sentient beings. So, in summary, I think talking about the difficulty of understanding the Buddha's wisdom at the very outset of the chapter is a rhetorical strategy of the Lotus Sutra so as to make the readers of the Lotus Sutra like you imagine how your life would look like if you will become a Buddha. If you know that, if you're certain that, oh, I will be a Buddha. Meaning, what does that mean to become a Buddha? I will end all my frustrations, all my stressful life, all my anxiety. I'll be free from all these worries and regrets and negative mental dispositions, and just to live in with happiness and joy each moment mindfully of my life. I will cherish each moment of my life, each moment of experience, each moment of encounter with anyone in my world. If you become a Buddha like that, how would your life look like? That's the question I can hear as we read the Lotus Sutra. So the Shakyamuni Buddha is in this chapter talking to Shariputra, one of his disciples, but you can imagine, you can put your feet onto the feet, how do you say it in English? I don't know. You can imagine yourself becoming a Shariputra. And the next is the list of selected passages that will give us the narrative sequence of what's going on in this chapter. So after talking about the difficulty of understanding the Buddha's wisdom, Shakyamuni Buddha tries to stop talking further. He says, Shariputra, that is enough. I should say no more. Why is this? Because the Dharma the Buddhas have attained is understood only rarely and with great difficulty. Only a Buddha together with the Buddha can fathom the ultimate reality of all things. Here it comes. A Buddha together with the Buddha. That's a very, very interesting phrase, right? Buddha together with the Buddha. What? Two Buddhas? Who are they? So it is talking about two Buddhas. If one is Shakyamuni, the question is, who would be the other Buddha? So this chapter is full of enigmatic points like this. But as we will learn, I think this means that one is Shakyamuni and the other Buddha is no one other than you, who is a reader of the Lotus Sutra, who is not yet Buddha, who is the Buddha to be, as you. So these two Buddhas, or Buddha together with the Buddha, can fathom the ultimate reality of all things. That's another skillful point of the Lotus Sutra to invite you to aspire for becoming a Buddha. This is interesting, isn't it? And then Buddha talks about skillful means, the title of the chapter, right? So the Buddha, the Shakyamuni says, through the power of skillful means has shown the teachings of the three vehicles to draw living beings away from their various attachments. So here we finally have a notion of skillful means. So among the audience were 1,200 Shravakas. One of the types of Buddhist practitioners that we talked about earlier, whose focus of practice is to hear the Buddha's teachings for their own enlightenment. In Mahayana Buddhist literature, as you may know, Shravakas are oftentimes put in contrast to Bodhisattvas, and Shravakas and thus are considered to be some kind of the lesser type of practitioners, and the Bodhisattvas are greater. So this is the contrast between the Hinayana, from the Mahayana point of view, Buddhism, and Mahayana Buddhism, Shravaka Buddhism and Bodhisattva Buddhism. Lotus Sutra is something to do with this kind of distinction. This distinction is provisional distinction. If you comprehend thoroughly, if you complete the practice of Shravaka thoroughly, that turns out to be a part of the Bodhisattva practice. And if you thoroughly comprehend and thoroughly practice the Bodhisattva practice, that unexpectedly turn out to be an aspect of Shravaka practice. So these 1,200 Shravakas go wonder why the Buddha all of a sudden is talking about this thing called the skillful means, and that the Buddha's wisdom is hard to understand. We attained Buddha's teachings and reached nirvana already. So catching this out, Shariputra asked the Buddha to explain why he talks about skillful means so highly, and that the Buddha's Dharma is hard to understand. That's narrative. But the Buddha declined Shariputra's appeal by saying that, no, Shariputra, it would just make everybody confused. So let me rather stop what I was about to say. So Buddha and Shakyamuni Buddha and Shariputra goes back and forth like this 3 times. This is one of the famous scenes in the Lotus Sutra setup as well in the chapter 2. And the third time, when Shariputra third time asked the Buddha to explain why, talked about the difficulty of understanding the Lotus Sutra, the wisdom of the Buddha, and the skillful means, finally Shakyamuni agrees to preach. However, as soon as Shakyamuni was about to preach, the following happens. The sutra says, some 5,000 monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen in the assembly immediately stood up, made a sign of respect to the Buddha, and withdrew. Among the entire assembly, as we saw in chapter 1 of the Lotus Sutra in a nutshell, in my last video, check out if you haven't taken a look at that yet. It's just 5,000 people is very just tiny portion of that. So not everybody was listening here in the Lotus Sutra assembly. But the question is, why did they leave? Well, the sutra says they are in a state of complacency. They thought they reached the final nirvana. But the point of the chapter 2 is to say, no, those who think they reach the final nirvana is not yet at the final stage. Because final is only revealed when the finality is brought to unending. Final is unending. This comes back to the Buddhist Lotus Sutra idea of the purposelessness of the Buddhahood. In monotheistic tradition, you value the contrast between the means and the end. Everything's oriented towards the purpose of the divine God, creator of all these creatures. But in Buddhism, there's no such hierarchical pictures of the creator and the creatures. Buddha is not a creator. Buddha is without that kind of purpose. Buddha is rather reaching nirvana, reaching the desirelessness. Desirelessness. That means purposelessness. So the Buddhahood means purposelessness. But it's not chaos, because of this purposelessness that sees the coherence of all other purposes of all sentient beings. Again, intersubsumptive nature of all different purposes, intersubsumption of all three vehicles in terms of the universally shared Buddha nature, Buddhahood, and so on. So what is at stake seems to be the relationship between the one and many, how that one and many paradoxical contrast turns out to be the oneness, as although it still preserves its differences. Besides all these points, there's at least 3 more important points that I recommend you to read on your own in this chapter. So if you open up the page 65 and 66, you hear the reasons why Buddhas appear in this world. And the second point is to say that anyone Buddhas teach and transform are bodhisattvas, beings that are Buddhas to be. That notion appears on page 66. Please take a look at that page as well. And the third point that I don't want you to miss that is to say all Buddhas use skillful means as their skillful pedagogical device for the sake of the Buddhahood of everyone. Alright, so thank you very much for watching this video. There are many ambiguities about these chapters. Please share your thoughts and comments in the section below, and let's have a conversation about this chapter together. Okay, thank you so much.